Velric Stone and Lira Quade believed they were too smart to be caught, calculated, meticulous, and invisible. But the one thing they couldn't erase was the truth. From the outside, they looked like ordinary people, but beneath that surface, they were two deeply disturbed minds bound by obsession, and together, they carried out a murder they thought no one would ever solve. What they didn't realize was that every perfect crime leaves behind a crack, and all it takes is one detective to pry it open. Evan Blayce wasn't the kind of man who made enemies. At 32, he had built a respectable life as a tech entrepreneur in the city of Weldom, a quiet, tree-lined town just far enough from the chaos of urban sprawl. He was known for being generous, often donating to local schools and shelters. He lived alone in a sleek downtown apartment, preferred walking to driving, and was routinely predictable. Every Thursday night, he worked late at his office across the river and left around 10 p.m., driving straight home. But on one particular Thursday, Evan didn't make it home. When his assistant, Zane Prohl, arrived at Evan's apartment the next morning to drop off some business files, he noticed the door slightly ajar. That was unusual. Evan was meticulous about security. Stepping inside, Zane found the apartment eerily quiet. The lights were off. Evan's phone was charging on the kitchen counter, and his laptop sat open on the living room desk, mid-email. Evan's coat hung on the wall. His keys, however, were gone. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place, but Zane knew something wasn't right. He waited several hours, calling Evan repeatedly, before finally contacting the police. An officer came, made a brief report, and noted that there were no signs of forced entry or foul play. Still, Evan's car was missing, and so was he. They filed it as a routine missing person case. The media barely noticed. What no one knew, what no one even suspected, was that two people had been watching Evan for weeks. One from the shadows, and one in plain sight. Velric Stone was a quiet, hard-faced man who worked in a rundown auto shop on the edge of town. He had repaired Evan's car once nearly a year ago. It had been a short interaction, but for some reason, Velric never forgot him. Maybe it was the way Evan spoke to him, or how casually he handed over his credit card without ever making eye contact. Something about Evan gnawed at him. The second person was Lira Quade, a self-employed photographer who drifted from city to city taking freelance gigs. Birthday parties, local art shows, anything that paid. She met Evan briefly during a charity fundraiser 3 months prior. She had been hired to document the event. Unlike Velric, she was instantly captivated. Her lens seemed to follow Evan more than any of the actual subjects of the night. What began as curiosity turned into something darker. She studied him, learned his schedule, knew where he shopped, where he got his coffee, when he worked late, and when he was most vulnerable. Velric and Lira weren't partners in the beginning. Their connection started in an online forum dedicated to urban exploration, abandoned places, tunnels, forgotten locations. A chat about an old train yard turned into direct messages. They started talking regularly. Eventually, they discovered a shared interest: Evan Blayce. The coincidence was strange at first, then unsettling. Instead of being alarmed, they found it thrilling. They met in person weeks before Evan's disappearance, in a dim parking lot behind a shuttered diner. There was no affection, no small talk. Their bond wasn't about trust or friendship. It was about control. Together, they formed a plan. The motive wasn't money or revenge in the traditional sense. It was obsession, possession. For Velric, it was about power. For Lira, it was about closeness. They wanted Evan not to suffer, but to disappear. On the night Evan vanished, the streets were slick with rain. He left his office as usual, unaware that his routine had become a trap. Velric waited in an alley 3 blocks away, while Lira tailed, Evan in her dark sedan. As Evan pulled into a rarely used back road, one he sometimes took when traffic was heavy, they made their move. a staged breakdown, a flat tire, a request for help. Evan, always the good citizen, pulled over. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. The following morning, while police began their checklist of routine questions and the city continued on as if nothing had changed, Velric and Lira were already miles away. They had wiped down surfaces, burned clothes, and smashed phones. To them, it was a clean break, a perfect crime. They believed they had planned every detail. They believed they were free. But behind every clean disappearance is a trail, no matter how small. And someone, somewhere, always starts following it. 7 days after Evan Blayce disappeared, 2 hikers veered off the main trail in Harridan Woods, looking for a place to rest. Deep in the forest, hidden behind a curtain of overgrowth, they stumbled upon an old, decaying barn. The roof sagged under the weight of years, the wood dark and warped with moisture. Curious, they stepped inside, their boots crunching on broken glass and brittle leaves. Dust filled the air, disturbed by the sudden presence of life. One of them noticed something glinting in the corner, half buried in sawdust. It was a watch, silver, scratched, and still ticking faintly. A name was etched. On the back, Evan B. Within hours, police had sealed off the site. The watch was identified as belonging to Evan Blayce. Nearby, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, investigators found bloodstains soaked deep into the wood. DNA analysis confirmed the blood was Evan's. With no body, the case was still officially a missing persons investigation, but the discovery shifted the tone. Evan Blayce was now presumed dead. Detective Mara Kellen had been following the case since the day Evan vanished. Reserved but relentless, she had a reputation for seeing things others overlooked. While most detectives focused on Evan's work or personal life, Mara had sensed something different. There were no enemies, no angry partners, no financial irregularities. Instead, she saw precision. His disappearance had the markings of something planned. She believed the barn wasn't a random location, it had meaning. Abandoned for decades, the property was technically unregistered, its ownership lost in bureaucratic confusion. Whoever chose it had done their homework. Crime scene technicians worked through the barn inch by inch. In the back, they found old gas canisters and a crumbling cot that looked recently disturbed. The walls were streaked with faded graffiti, but one section looked scrubbed clean, as if someone had tried to erase markings. A camera lens cap lay under the cot, and a half-burned cloth with a chemical odor was discovered nearby. The scene whispered of failed attempts to destroy evidence. Back in the city, Evan's assistant, Zane Prohl, was devastated. Though not part of the official investigation, he began digging into Evan's last known contacts. He reviewed calendar, entries, emails, delivery receipts, anything that might provide a clue. One of the strangest things he noticed was a recent charge for an automotive repair dated nearly a year earlier. Zane didn't recognize the garage. It had been a small place on the outskirts of town. Evan hadn't mentioned any car trouble at the time. The garage's owner? Velric Stone. Meanwhile, Detective Kellen pulled security footage from the area surrounding Evan's apartment and office. For the most part, nothing stood out. But after running days of footage side by side, she found something curious. A motorcycle, passing Evans Street on 4 consecutive nights before the disappearance. Always around 9:50 p.m. The helmeted rider never lingered, but always looked toward Evans' building. The license plate was unreadable, caked with mud, or deliberately altered. The motorcycle itself matched the profile of one Velric Stone had, sold 6 months ago, something Kellen found in an old police database. Velric hadn't been on anyone's radar until now. Further down the rabbit hole, she searched Evan's social media presence. At the charity event 3 months before his disappearance, photos had been taken by a freelancer named Lira Quade. The event gallery was posted online, showcasing smiling guests, food, and speeches. But when Mara looked closely, she noticed Evan appeared repeatedly, sometimes in the background, sometimes only partially in frame, but always present. It was almost as if someone was following him through the lens. Mara began to suspect that the two were connected. A mechanic and a photographer, seemingly unrelated, but now both linked to Evan. The discovery in the barn had widened the mystery, but now the edges were starting to sharpen. Someone had lured Evan to that remote location. Someone had chosen it carefully. Someone had tried to make him vanish without a trace, but mistakes had already been made. The watch left behind, the blood, the camera lens cap. These were not the calling cards of professionals. Velric and Lira believed they had buried every link, erased every clue. But in trying to vanish Evan, they had left echoes, and Mara Kellen had begun to hear them, growing louder with every step. Detective Mara Kellen sat alone in her office, the walls around her papered with photos, maps, and timelines. Red thread connected Evan Blayce's last known locations, a small photograph of Velric stone pinned beside a grainy image of a motorcycle, and a printed flyer from the charity event where Lira Quade had worked. Each item was a thread, and she was determined to pull until the entire web unraveled. What had started as a disappearance was now clearly a homicide, and Mara believed the killers had left behind just enough to trace them. She began by examining Evan's habits again. His routine was solid, same route, same office hours, same grocery store, even the same coffee shop every morning. But it was the days before his disappearance that interested her most. She reviewed traffic camera footage from the block surrounding Evan's office. A dark car was visible in several shots, idling across the street. Though the plates were unreadable, the make and model matched a sedan registered under Lira's cousin, a woman who lived out of state. It had been reported missing months ago, but no follow-up had ever been done. Then came the real breakthrough. A tech expert analyzing cell tower pings near the barn discovered a burner phone had connected briefly to a nearby tower the night Evan vanished. The signal lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. Police had found no phone at the scene, but Mara suspected someone had used it to communicate, perhaps to coordinate a meeting or give directions. A records check on recently purchased prepaid phones in a 20-mile radius showed one bought in cash just days before the incident. The time of activation, location, and usage pointed to someone local. Mara turned her attention to Velric's past. He had no major criminal record, only a few traffic violations and a brief disorderly conduct charge. But buried in the notes from that arrest was a detail that caught her attention. Velric had been found trespassing on private property with a crowbar and gloves. When questioned, he claimed he thought the building was abandoned and wanted to explore it. The location? Less than 2 miles from the barn where Evan's blood had been found. The report was dismissed at the time, but it suggested familiarity with the area, and possibly scouting it out months in advance. At the same time, she requested access to Lira Quade's digital footprint. Though her social media profiles were curated and clean, a forensic team recovered deleted photos from an old cloud backup tied to one of her accounts. The photos were disturbing. Candid shots of Evan walking down the street, Evan unlocking his apartment, Evan sitting alone at a diner. These weren't pictures taken at an event. These were surveillance photos, taken without his knowledge. The timestamps proved that Lira had been following him long before the charity event. Mara pieced together a chilling pattern. Velric and Lira had become obsessed in their own ways, him with control, her with infatuation. They found each other through mutual curiosity, then shared that obsession until it twisted into action. She didn't think either could have gone through with it alone, but together, they became something darker. And what's more, they had likely done test runs, watching Evan, following him, rehearsing the trap, but they had slipped. Mara revisited the storage facility near the edge of town. She remembered a charge on Evan's account that didn't match anything else, a payment for a unit he never used. When she visited the location, the manager confirmed Evan hadn't been there in over a year, but one of the units was recently accessed with a copied keycard. Surveillance footage from the facility showed a man resembling Velric entering late at night, pulling a tarp over something large in the back of a car. Warrants were issued. The storage unit was opened. Inside, Evan's car sat in near-perfect condition, tires deflated, windows smeared with cleaning fluid, but one detail had been missed: a single blonde hair embedded in the back seat. Lira's DNA confirmed the match. The noose was tightening. They believed their plan was airtight. They thought they had left nothing behind. But the past was starting to speak, and every trace they thought erased was now coming back, louder and clearer. Detective Mara Kellen now had the two names she needed. It was no longer a question of who. It was only a matter of when. Lira Quade stood on a coastal cliff in Selwyn Bay, camera slung over her shoulder, pretending to capture the stormy horizon. She had been living under a false name for the last 3 weeks, moving from town to town, using cash and burner phones. Her face had changed slightly, her hair now cut short and dyed auburn, her usual style traded for loose jackets and sunglasses. She thought she had buried Lira Quade somewhere back in Weldom, along with the last piece of Evan Blayce. But what she didn't know was that her trail hadn't gone cold. It had just begun to smoke. Detective Mara Kellen had issued quiet warrants, not to alert her suspects, but to surround them. Her team split into 2 groups, one tracking Lira, the other tracing Velric Stone. They had enough to detain both. But Mara wanted more than just an arrest. She wanted the truth. The body had never been found, and without it, prosecutors would face a wall in court. She needed one of them to talk. She needed one to crack. Velric was found living under his real name in a makeshift trailer behind an old junkyard an hour outside the city. He had grown paranoid, checking windows at night, keeping a shotgun by the door. He had erased everything he could, burned his journals, cleaned his tools with industrial bleach, and ditched his phone. But when police moved in, he didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He just stared blankly at the floor as cuffs clicked around his wrists. Lira was harder to catch. She had no known address, no digital presence anymore, and few connections. But her face betrayed her. A local art gallery had unknowingly posted a photo of her on social media. Lira, in the background of a crowd, partially visible. The algorithm tagged her under her alias, but the software used by the task force flagged her cheekbones, the tilt of her head, and the way she wore her camera bag. It was enough. She was arrested 2 days later at a roadside diner in Greyfell, calmly eating soup as if her world hadn't already collapsed. In separate interrogation rooms, the two were presented with photos, timelines, DNA matches, and surveillance footage. Still, both refused to speak. Velric stared straight ahead. Lira barely blinked. They seemed to trust silence more than words, clinging to the belief that without a body, there could be no conviction. But Mara had already planned for this. She had studied their psychology. She knew that obsession always left cracks. Instead of pushing them together, she tore them apart. She let Lira believe Velric had betrayed her first, painting him as the weak link. To Velric, she implied that Lira had confessed everything and was trying to escape sentencing by pinning the planning on him. Slowly, under the pressure, Velric began to twitch. He fidgeted with his fingers. He asked for water. His gaze shifted from the table to the wall, then to the ceiling. Finally, he asked if his lawyer could come in, then said 5 words Mara had been waiting for. "I'll tell you everything now." Velric didn't give details out of guilt. He gave them out of fear. He believed Lira was going to turn on him, and in his mind, the only way to survive was to control the narrative. He led them to the final location, an unmarked section of forest 2 miles north of the barn, beneath a hollow tree where they had buried what was left of Evan Blayce. Wrapped in a plastic tarp, weighted with stones, The remains were still identifiable. A forensic team confirmed it was him. Lira was confronted with the discovery, but even then she didn't speak. She stared at the photograph of Evan's remains with a strange, almost sad calmness, like she was watching a dream unravel. When told that Velric had confessed, her only response was a slight tilt of her head. But it was over. They had believed. Their obsession gave them control. That planning made them invincible. That love, or power, or whatever twisted bond they shared, could outwit truth. But now, sitting behind mirrored glass in separate rooms, they were no longer the killers who vanished Evan Blayce. They were just suspects, cornered and defeated. Their silence had broken. Their freedom was over, and the world would now learn what they did. The trial of Velric Stone and Lira Quade began 6 months after their arrests. National headlines called them the Barn Duo and Obsession Killers. But in the courtroom, the focus remained on facts, on the chilling unraveling of a plan that began with silent stalking and ended with brutal murder. The prosecution built its case brick by brick, each piece of evidence layered with the quiet confidence of undeniable truth. Evan Blayce's watch, the blood-soaked barn floor, the hidden car, the surveillance photos, and, most damning of all, Velric's confession. Velric had hoped his cooperation would earn him leniency, but once the full transcript was reviewed, it became clear he wasn't just an accomplice. He was the architect. He had detailed how he selected the barn, how he studied Evan's habits for months, and how he convinced Lira to help lure Evan there. Lira had been the bait, the soft voice behind the camera, the familiar face from the charity event. She had gained Evan's trust, offered to collaborate on a feature interview, and set the trap with a calm smile and steady hand. The defense tried to argue mental instability. They portrayed Velric as a disturbed loner manipulated by Lira's charm, and Lira as a fragile artist lost in fantasy, unable to grasp reality. But the evidence told a different story. Emails recovered from Velric's old computer showed months of planning. Voice notes from Lira's cloud storage revealed rehearsed scripts. How she would talk to Evan, where she would lead him, what she would say to keep him calm until it was too late. They had recorded themselves discussing the plan, laughing quietly, feeding off each other's darkness like co-conspirators in a play they thought no one would ever see. Detective Mara Kellen took the stand midway through the trial. Calm and precise, she explained how she had followed the smallest of clues, how the watch, the cloud backups, and even a smudge of mud on Evan's tire had all been breadcrumbs leading back to the killers. The courtroom fell silent when she showed a photo recovered from Lira's deleted gallery. Evan, seated in the barn, confused and alone. It was the last known image taken before his death. The jury deliberated for only 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, conspiracy. Kidnapping, evidence tampering, both received life sentences without parole. Velric showed no reaction when the verdict was read. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on a crack in the courtroom wall. Lira, on the other hand, turned slowly to look at the jury, then at the prosecution, table, and finally at Mara. For a brief moment, her mask slipped, revealing not fear or regret, but disappointment, as if the world had failed to understand her story. They were transferred to separate maximum security facilities. Their contact was cut off. The letters Lira tried to send Velric were intercepted and destroyed. Over time, their names faded from the headlines, replaced by new horrors. But in the quiet corners of true crime forums and investigative podcasts, their story lived on. A cautionary tale of obsession, control, and the illusion of invincibility. Evan Blayce's family held a private memorial in the same park where he used to run each morning. A bench was placed under a large elm tree with his name engraved into the wood. People came and left flowers. Some sat quietly, others cried. His parents never spoke to the media again, but a short statement was released. Justice doesn't bring Evan back, but it keeps his light from being extinguished. Detective Mara Kellen was promoted shortly after the trial. She moved to a new department but kept Evan's case file in her drawer, a reminder that even the best-laid plans can unravel with a single missed detail. She never forgot the photo of Evan in the barn, the quiet plea in his eyes that said more than words ever could. Velric and Lira thought they had created a perfect crime, one that no one would ever trace, one where the victim would disappear and the world would move on. But they underestimated the power of details, the persistence of truth, and the quiet resolve of those who chase it. They thought they got away with murder. They didn't.